how do we feel about brainstorming a new novel? I haven't done this in a while. I think the last time I was working on a new novel project was like Preptober 2024. And so for that NaNoWriMo, I wrote about 10,000 words to Project Apothecary, and then I kind of paused work on it. I pretty much shelved it after 10,000 words. I still want to write it. Not right now. Now I'm thinking it's about time I start working on a new project because I finally finished the first draft of one of my forever drafts. I finished the second draft of one of my other ones that I'm eternally working on. It was actually between that, working on draft 3 of that, and brainstorming a new novel. So I'm going to brainstorm the new project, see if I like it, and I'll either run with that or start working on draft 3 of my other one, my YA fantasy, Project Assassin. I started making a Pinterest board for what I'm referring to as Project Rockstar. I did this a little while ago, but I wanted to do more in terms of getting this developed. Taylor, Riley, Jamie, Casey are all kind of names that I liked for characters in the story. I don't have actual characters. I was like kind of hesitant to share like the this meets this kind of comp because I feel like someone else is going to take it and do a better job than I could do, but whatever, I guess I'll say. Basically, it's like Daisy Jones and the Six meets Vans Warped Tour. So it's the 2000s pop punk bands. In a way, it's like the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, where it's like the tabloids and everything, but it's obviously very different than the old glamour of 60s Hollywood and beyond. It's rather a great emphasis on the rise of the digital age. So like Live Journal and MySpace, even Facebook and blogs and YouTube as it goes on from there. So basically, it's the idea of two people in different bands in the similar space that have kind of a tumultuous relationship. I guess in a way it's a romance, but I feel like kind of the idea of a romance is these characters falling in love and then by the end they're in love. I feel like my characters are going to be a lot more tortured and it might not be a happy ending. It's more so angst. Anyway, so this is kind of vibe I've got going on right now. It's just like the rock scene, whether it's hardcore or punk, pop punk, that kind of thing. And then also just the emoticons, like the statuses, of like the 2000s internet. I wish I could find more resources and references what the internet looked like year by year throughout the 2000s because I was born in 2003, but I kind of am interested in setting this in 2003. Obviously, I don't have firsthand knowledge and experience of that time frame, so I'm just interested in that. So like the mixed media aspect of like Daisy Jones and the Six, well, that's more so just like a interview, which I would want to employ interview kind of things. I guess it's quite similar in a lot of ways to the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo in terms of the mixed media thing, where you have magazine articles and stuff about these different celebrities in universe. I mean, in a way, it's even kind of giving tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, and the idea is that it'll span many years of these people's careers from when they're kind of nobodies working on something into bigger, grander thing. There would be two different characters. I don't even know who these characters are yet. Just two people from different bands. Probably one is a little more hardcore or heavy and one is more like commercially palatable, able to succeed in that sense. I very much like an androgyny that kind of happened in the 2000s. So I like all of these names. Like I said, like the gender neutral thing. Oh, also, I just made a Scrivener document project, whatever, for Project Rockstar. I have it in a folder, Project Rockstar, in a folder, draft 1. And then the actual file is Project Rockstar 2026 0410 because I like to keep track of the date that I first started. So I have pretty much no idea beyond that. It's kind of just following two star-crossed individuals in a way. Like I said, I mean, I guess it's a romance. I guess, right? But I feel like I said, a romance is supposed to like end on a happier note. When it comes to brainstorming a story for me, it usually comes down to figuring out the characters, because you figure out the characters and you have a situation, the characters will do stuff. You just kind of have to get them into that situation and see what they do. At least that's how it works in my head. So I just need to iron out who the characters are. And sometimes I only have a small idea of what I'm working with, and then they kind of bloom on page and then I get to know them, or I have an idea of them and once I actually start writing, they take on a new shape that I hadn't intended. That happens all the time. So Taylor, Riley, Jamie, and Casey, I can use all of those names now and just I'll create characters like that. And then I'll probably figure out which of those I like most for the main players of the story. And then I'll go from this other board and kind of extract from there. I love gender neutral names, or even names that are like typically given to boys that are given to girls, like Tyler or Dylan. I really like Tyler as a girl's name, but I do have a Taylor here, and I feel like Taylor is really good. They're a little too close to have both, but I mean, a Dylan is good if it were given to a girl. One of the things about this story, an element that I played with in my head, is not actually defining gender for any of these characters, just having them referred to neutrally or just not referred to. So the characters are not necessarily non-binary, but they could be. It's just the gender is not as relevant, which kind of is sort of dumb because I feel like the pop punk emo whatever scene of the 2000s was definitely very misogynistic and at once homophobic, but then also not. Part of the reason why I wouldn't feel the need to disclose it is because the story isn't exploring backlash to a controversial relationship or something. It's more so two people who care about each other, write songs about each other, all this kind of stuff, but they don't really actually fully engage in a relationship. It's kind of just like pining from afar and only communicating through songs back and forth to one another. That's more so the idea of it. I mean, I figure the side characters I probably would define who's a guy or a girl, but for the main characters, I don't even know if it matters. I think it kind of gives it an interesting element to the story. I don't know. It might be dumb, but that's one of the things, that's like kind of the main thing I actually had in mind aside from the actual setting. But of these characters, I like the name Riley. I mean, that could potentially be a main character. I do like Casey a lot also, but I wonder if it's like too if I am too worried about that, Jamie definitely is not an option. Taylor or Dylan for the other person could work. I don't know if I like Riley or Casey more. I think I like Riley. Riley and Taylor, maybe? I feel like a lot of the people I have on my general people, I think this is like Taylor Hanson or whatever his name is. But very pretty boy, I feel, you know? Which kind of seems like the vibe I'm going for. Elliot Page. Bow. Yeah, like that's one of the Hanson people. Is it Taylor? I don't know. Thinking we've got potentially Riley and Taylor. I really like the idea of one of these characters being like very emotionally large and very vocal, sociable. So they would have like a strong presence on this rising social media. Social media was so different back then, but like blogging and things like that. And then someone who is more way back in the shadows. And maybe they like pen some songs for their band, but they're not out publicly saying stuff. So in an interview or something, it might be a little cryptic things. They're not saying things so blatantly as this other character. I don't know which of these is giving more like out there. To me, it's probably this Riley, and then Taylor is more so in the back. And then these other guys or girls are going to be people in their bands. I've kind of moved it around. I was like, maybe Dylan and Casey are the main things we're working with. So Dylan is the one who's more like outspoken, just kind of a little bit messy in a way. And then we've got the other, Casey. The reason I changed it is because initially I was thinking this was Taylor, but then I'm like pretty sure that's Taylor Hanson. And so I don't know. It just, I didn't really want to have like a duplicate of a real person. So there's a mix of girls and boys as reference on these boards because it's like, I don't know. Maybe I will decide, but right now I don't really know. I'm just kind of got a vibe going on. This is the Dylan that I've got working with so far. And then this is Casey. Riley, I think this is probably a girl. Probably like a guitarist for one of the bands. Jamie, just another character. I don't know. Obviously got somebody playing guitar, but it could be like, they don't really have keyboard and like emo pop punk, so I don't know, bass or something. I do have a space for Taylor, I just didn't fill it yet. I feel like the main one is like messy, and maybe they're the one who finds the most commercial success. Casey might be more so like in a more niche thing. Maybe it's more hardcore or something like that, even though I think this character is a lot calmer, kind of more tempered seeming, so they're kind of in the background of the band. I think probably this is like a frontman and this is more like a somebody in the back. Okay, guys, I have a little bit of a conundrum. I know I was saying Daisy Jones and the Six meets Vans Warped Tour, but in my mind, this first band, very Warped Tour. Like, very pop punk, or just like even just hard post punk or post hardcore punky, like that kind of very Vans Warped Tour. But this other band to me is more like goth rock, kind of like something different. I don't know, but that's not something that would be at something like Warped Tour. Of course, I'm probably going to make up a festival for this so I can make it whatever I want, but I do feel like there is a distinction between the kind of bands that would have played Warped Tour, like the pop punk thing, versus like more Evanescence-y. And I'm even thinking like Motionless in White, Black Veil Brides, but that's later 2000s. That's not like 2003. I mean, Evanescence is. I don't know. This is stuff to think about. I mean, I don't know if it really fully makes sense to like their full goth rock, but in my mind, I keep thinking keyboard, but not keyboard. I'm like thinking like organs or something. But I feel like, I don't know. I don't know if that's really a thing that was happening at that time. One thing I'm not liking is that it's giving very white. It feels very like samey. It's a little boiled chicken with no seasoning. So I think I'm gonna keep trying to figure out the characters I'm working with, and maybe a band will shape up more. Hey guys, updates. I did update the Pinterest board, so I have like a little bit of something going on for each of the members of each of the bands. So at this point, I have 4 members for each band. So vocals, guitar, bass, drum, the whole thing, everything that you've got going on. In a rock band, maybe one of the bands will end up getting a 5th member, but just from whatever brainstorming I did at that point, that's kind of where I landed. A little bit of a vibe and names. Also, in terms of the characters, I like coming up with the Enneagram and MBTI for characters that I make, just so I have something to reference. A lot of times whatever I come up with in the beginning ends up changing, but I find Enneagram very helpful in keeping consistent arcs for characters, whether they're regressing or growing or whatever. Enneagram is like super helpful for me. But anyway, today basically I took a moment in my little brainstorming notes. The first thing I did was figure out Dylan and Casey's problem, want, and need, and this is a strategy, so to say, from Save the Cat Writes a Novel. I really appreciate this book. It's not something you necessarily need to treat like a Bible, but it is helpful, I find, especially if I find a sticky spot in a story. It helps get me unstuck. The establishing from the beginning the problem that your character has, what they want, what they think will fix their problem, and then the need, what actually will fix it, that they only figure out throughout the course of the story in the end, yada yada yada. Since I've never actually written a romance before, I did recall a good chunk of this book focuses on genre, but it is genre different than what you would think of in terms of fantasy, sci-fi, or whatever. It's more so a type of story. So there's like dude with a problem. And anyway, the one I was thinking of was buddy love, which a lot of romance novels tend to fall under. So then I was reading up on what that entails in the thinking of Save the Cat. There's an A story and a B story. The A story is the external story, the character going after their want to fix their problem. And then there's the B story, which is the internal story, which is usually what they need. And there's like a B story character that helps them learn what it is they need. The B story character tends to come in the second act. So about like 22% is typically when this character is introduced. However, with the buddy love genre, the main story, the A story, is the relationship between these two characters. So this character would actually be introduced, the catalyst. They're catalyzing the whole rest of the story. And that's kind of a way to tell if your story could be classified as buddy love. So that was something for me to think about. I was like, well, do I have these characters meet earlier, like just after the setup at about 10%, or is it something they come in later and there's a different A story to begin with? Because any story has typically multiple things going on. So I do have every intention of the characters' careers and their place in the industry being a huge part of their world, of their story, of their growth, and things like that. So I just needed to figure out which was the A story and which is the B story. At this point, I still don't even know. I was just trying to do some brainstorming, really trying to iron out their want, like the A story tie-in, and then their need, the B story tie-in, that would help define it. So I think after doing that, I still didn't know. And then I basically wrote a couple lines determining what it would look like if I made the relationship the A story and like navigating the industry the B story, or making navigating the industry the A story and the relationship the B story. At this point, I still am not exactly sure because I was thinking probably it is more so leaning the buddy love sort of thing. Then out of curiosity, I was trying to figure out what Daisy Jones and the Six, not that I'm using that as like a roadmap, but just for reference, because I mean, it is a comp for what this idea was to begin with. And I saw that it was actually categorized as institutionalized, which is a different genre, different Save the Cat genre. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. I could see my story aligning with that too. But I did make out a beat sheet with the 15 different beats, an idea of what I might be working with, not necessarily what it will be. This actually sees it more in line with the characters meeting at the beginning of the second act, just kind of getting an idea for what the story could potentially look like. I'm probably going to be tweaking it, but that's what I've been working on today. Morning, guys. Yesterday, I spent so much time doing one of my favorite things, which is researching something that doesn't matter at all. It started out efficient and well intentioned. My other story that I've worked on, Project Hometown, is set in two timelines, 1994 and 1999, both of which I obviously did not live in. And so I had some questions about technology or cultural shifts and things like that. So what I would do is I'd ask the question and I'd find a Reddit thread about it and I'd print it out and use it as reference. That worked for me, answering some questions, getting some ideas, because I'm getting it from actual people, not just articles that tend not to be very helpful. So I was doing that again, and so I was just doing it for reference. How popular was pop punk in the 2000s? How often was pop punk on mainstream top 40 radio back in the 2000s? I also was curious about lineups, festivals, and things. I was looking at bands Warped Tour. I guess Warped Tour is known for having like this big inflatable thing, and then at the beginning of the day, they shuffle all of the bands and then put it in a random order. I think it's the only festival that does that, so I'm probably not going to do that because then it's going to look like I'm ripping them off, which I guess I would be. But I did think that was interesting because I was trying to determine headlining versus opening acts and things like that, and the different stages, because I know Warped Tour has several different stages. So I guess they have main stages and then they have other stages. Paramore played like the I don't know how you say it, Shira Girl or Shira Girl stage, and I believe that was for bands more so featuring girls and women. I was wondering if that was something I should implement into whatever festival I make, because like what I was talking about, how it was pretty misogynistic scene, so I figured there was some level of separation there. That was all good and meaningful and got me somewhere. Then I was like, I want to get an idea of what the radio sounded like at the time, like what a pop punk hit, where that would rank among other hits. Of course, I think 2003 is a little early for that. So what I did is I went and looked up top 40 archives. I have 1 page, 2 page, 3 page and a half, 4 pages. Taking notes of the top 40 chart for the first and last week of every month from 2002 through 2004 and keeping track of all of the artists who hit number one, blah, blah, blah. So pointless and dumb. In 2002, there was, Nickelback and No Doubt, Linkin Park all hit number one. Avril Lavigne came onto the scene, obviously way poppier, pop punk, so to speak, but there was that kind of thing going on. And I was surprised 2003 was way more like, well, we did have Three Doors Down, Christina Aguilera, J-Lo, but then also 50 Cent. 2004, Outkast was huge, also Jessica and Ashley Simpson, Britney Spears, Maroon 5, Usher. Anyway, so this gave me a little bit of context, but I spent so much time on it. I realized I actually have a book on my shelf that would be good for reference. Where Are Your Boys Tonight? The Oral History of Emo's Mainstream Explosion, 1999 to 2008. So I was like, that would be perfect to read up on. So I did start. You can't really tell, I'm not very far. I'm like 50 pages in. So far, it's really helpful in giving me some context. So I did determine before looking into all of this, Dylan's band, I did say like very Warped Tour, I guess more like emo, hardcore, that kind of vibe. And as opposed to what I was thinking with Casey's band being more goth rock, then I was thinking more nu metal, but now I'm thinking just like pop punk, like Jimmy Eat World, Simple Plan, something that could be read as a little sellout-y. So I think that'll be a friction between the two bands. And I don't know, I just think it's juicy and good, and I think that's really cool. So after I was doing all of this thinking and research and reading, I was like, well, maybe I should try to do a different beat sheet for the story, just to kind of shift it, see what it looked like if it was more buddy love leaning like I was thinking. Now that I'm getting so much more context for the industry, I think I have to kind of stick with this. And actually one of the big things for it is because with the Save the Cat idea, with your B story, you have a B story character. Like I was talking about, they kind of help the protagonist on their way to figuring out the theme they need to learn by the end of the story. And in my head, Dylan is that for Casey, Casey is that for Dylan. If I made their thing the main plot, I have to come up with new B story characters, but these characters are completely who would teach the respective character the B story theme they need to learn. Like I said, Save the Cat, not a Bible, it's a guideline, blah blah blah, but that was kind of my thinking. I think their dynamic might end up being more B story, and just navigating the industry is more so the A story. That's where it's sitting now in my head. Also, just indulgently, I did make a list of tragic relationships in media, things where they didn't work out in the end. I'm not gonna say who for like sake of spoilers. I was trying to figure out what it is that makes these relationships so tragic, and it sticks with us and makes us feel so devastated. And a lot of them is like one of them dies. I'm like, okay, I don't know if that's exactly what I had in mind to do. So I was trying to look at the few who had something different going on. And I do have a couple for reference that I'm like, yeah. And those are the ones that hurt way more, because it's like they're not totally robbed of the chance to be together. There's something else, whether it be someone else or their own selves. And that's kind of, I find the most tragic, and I think what I want to implement into my story. Anyway, I think I'm going to wrap up this video here. I feel like I have a really good foundation to build off of. With my other stories, I do brainstorm, but it's over such a longer time, and it's more just like casually. And if I think of something, I'll be like, oh yeah, write that down. I haven't been so much in something really trying to figure out and crack it to begin with before I start writing. So this is pretty different experience for me, but I think it's good. The next step might be me outlining and trying my hand at drafting. I guess I'll just have to stay tuned to see what happens next. Alright, well, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time in future videos. I can't even remember what my outro is. I think it's bye-bye.